This jail's a shithole. Proper shithole. You know what I'm saying? Proper shithole. Don't get me wrong, people like us make it a shithole, innit?
Most adult prisons are notorious, but there are even more notorious prisons for children and youths across the world. Some of these prisons have ceased to operate, while others remain to this day.
A new report by the U.S. Department of Justice found an estimated 7.1% of detainees at juvenile detention facilities around the country were sexually victimized in 2018.
From Oak Hill Center to Feltham Young, Offenders Institute, these are 7 of the most notorious child-only prisons in the world. Number 1. Spofford Juvenile Detention Center. Spofford Juvenile Detention Center used to be one of the most notorious child-only prisons in the entire world. In this prison, you were bound to witness the height of violence, terror, and sodomy at a level you've probably only heard of in crime documentaries. What makes this really interesting is that all the inmates at Spofford Juvenile Detention Center were under the age of 15. Although it was then known as Bridges Detention Center, Spofford ran from 1957 and closed down in 2011. That is a period of 54 years. During its 54-year run, Spofford was known to be the most infamous child-only prison facility. But by March 2011, the government had had enough and put an end to the abomination of this child prison, where even staff members were more dangerous than the youth inmates behind bars. But as chilling and terrifying Spofford was, there's another child-only prison that was arguably worse. And this brings us to number 2. Tryon Juvenile Detention Center. Tryon Juvenile Center was a boys-only detention center in Fulton County, an hour northwest of Albany. These young delinquents were from different parts of New York, like New York City, Harlem, Brooklyn, Brownsville, Flatbush, to name a few, and famous boxer Mike Tyson was once a resident here in the 1980s. In fact, many claim that it was here, at Tryon, that Tyson learned to box. He was 12 years old then. Tryon Juvenile Detention Center used to go by the name Tryon School for Boys. Basically, it was meant to reform young male delinquents and transform them into better, more responsible citizens. Normally, in the state of New York, there are 3 different types of residential facilities for kids convicted of crimes. Kids who have been found guilty of committing very serious crimes are tried as adults and are sent to what is called a secure facility. This is like the equivalent of a maximum security prison. On the other hand, though, kids who have been tried and convicted of very low-level crimes are sent to facilities that require the least amount of barricade. Often, these facilities have no fence. Tryon was neither for offenders with the highest or lowest crime. It housed young offenders who committed crimes in between both ends. So, it was a secure facility, but not too heavily guarded. There were locks on the doors, and the fence only had 2 loops of razor wire. Some of the mid to low-level offenses of the detainees include robbery, petty larceny, violating probation. Tryon was a really depressing place. This was an objective fact that presented itself to anyone who visited. Even Gladys Carrion, the commissioner who was newly appointed to oversee the state's juvenile prisons in 2007, found it so depressing, so much so, that after leaving Tryon, she cried in her car, which was in the parking lot. Maybe this incident was what brought about the end of one of the most notorious child prisons the world has ever seen. Or maybe it was the fact that in 2008, a year after the commissioner's visit, a video of a young resident being assaulted found its way to the agency's headquarters. It's hard to pin it down to one thing. Perhaps it's a combination of different factors that was intensified by the death of a kid named Daryl Thompson. Daryl Thompson was a 15-year-old kid. Alongside other boys, Daryl lived in one of the few story buildings named Briarwood Cottage. On a Sunday morning, Daryl and 4 other boys were in the bathroom brushing their teeth. Normally, it was forbidden to talk while this morning routine was going on, and this was especially hard to do on this day, considering that the boys had been on lockdown for 2 days. They could not play basketball or do any other fun activities they would normally do, and there was no hope that the lockdown would be called off anytime soon. Tired and exhausted, Daryl broke the silence and said, "Am I going to get my rec? You guys won't give us our rec." Then, just like that, with no further provocation, one of the aides stormed into the bathroom. There was a slight scuffle, but the aide got the better of Daryl. He pinned him to the floor with the help of another aide. Then a third one cuffed his hands to his back. Daryl ran out of breath. He was rushed out of Tryon in an ambulance. That was the last his 4 other friends would see him. Although Daryl's death was ruled as a homicide by the medical examiner, the grand jury did not indict any of the employees. Tryon was knock a boy damn near out with his helmet on. I felt wonderful. This middle-aged man with graying hair revealed all this and didn't seem to hesitate when asked for his name. The young delinquents were treated worse than animals, and no matter their offense, they would be locked up. It didn't matter whether it was a little misdemeanor that could be looked over, but besides the brutality of the officers, the young inmates were also up to really crazy shenanigans inside the prison. One of them was drugs. There were so many cases of young boys who were certified to be drug-free before going to Oak Hill. But once there, they immediately test positive for illegal substances. There were many reports that drugs were smuggled into the facility, and the staff members were the ones who did the smuggling to make extra cash. Number 4, Feltham Young Offenders Institute in West London. Located in West London, Feltham Prison is now the most violent prison in England. And this is really shocking considering the fact that it is a prison for teenagers, and it is currently 6 times higher than the rate of violence at HMP Bedford, the most violent adult prison in the UK. During the last 10-day inspection that was held just months ago, Feltham had 84 residents, or to be more accurate, 84 young residents. The residents at Feltham are mainly boys. The inspection took place in March, and it was discovered that there had been 410 incidents of violence in just 1 year. That comes to a rate of 488 incidents per 100 children, compared to 80.6 incidents per 100 prisoners at Bedford. That's a really huge margin. But there was something even more scary. In the course of that 1 year, over 300 weapons were discovered in this youth prison facility, nearly 3 times the amount they found in the previous year, which was 122. These weapons were mainly fashioned out of items they could easily find, items like pencils, plugs, and so on. At some point last year, the block dedicated to educating the teenage delinquents was temporarily shut down because assaults kept increasing, with no hope of cooling down anytime soon. Violence has become normal at Feltham. In fact, many of the children have claimed they did not want their parents to visit them because violence could occur at any time. During the last inspection, 7 kids were separated from the rest. These 7 were the most crooked, the most hardened, and the most unyielding of the lot, and they were separated for 50 days. In fact, 2 of the 7 were separated for 100 days. At some point last year, 2023, a single individual attacked 38 staff members within a space of 7 months. Not long after, dogs were brought into Feltham to give a much-needed order at the prison. The facilities at Feltham are far from good. The toilets were found to be rusty and filthy, and the young prisoners were not provided with adequate cleaning materials. The building is run down, and because it is poorly insulated, there are usually many leaks. But things seem to have been on the upside, particularly since the last inspection. Over 280 measures were put in place to make sure the kids didn't mix. Kids who would have no problem being in the company of other kids were grouped together. Now, although the violence seems to have reduced, Feltham is still one of the scariest child prisons in the world, just like Ashfield, except Ashfield is located just outside of Bristol. Number 5. Ashfield Juvenile Prison. Ashfield Juvenile Prison is a privately run youth prison very close to Bristol in England. The inmates' ages range from 15 to 18. Till this very moment, less than 2% of the inmates are in for minor offenses like car crimes. The majority of them have usually been sentenced for either one or a combination of crimes, as young offenders between the ages of 18 and 21 who were serving very long sentences. Although it was finally converted into a fully adult prison a few years ago, many still associate Aylesbury Prison with what it used to be, a notorious young offenders institution.
To be honest, because he's done so well, and I think that he's built some fantastic bridges with staff over the last few months, and he's got himself into the mess. He's got himself into a position where he seems happy all the time.
How notorious was Aylesbury Prison before its full conversion into an adult prison? How does the violence compare to Feltham and Ashfield prisons? Year after year, violence grew exponentially in Aylesbury Prison. When HMIP, that is HM Inspectorate of Prisons, visited in April of 2017, they noted that during the course of the 6 months prior to their inspection, there had been 38 assaults on staff members alone. 133 assaults on prisoners, and 77 fights overall. 33 of the assaults were very serious and often involved more than one assailant on a single victim. One such scenario played out when two inmates, Tyler and Jordan, jointly beat another young inmate in the prison yard. They beat, violently attacked, and nearly killed their victim. The issue was taken to Wycombe Magistrates Court on May 25th, where they were both found guilty of affray. Affray simply means the use of extreme violence towards someone, such that a bystander fears for his life. One was sentenced to 16 weeks in prison, and the other was sentenced to 14 weeks in prison, besides the additional cost of £128 each. There have been cases of self-harm at Aylesbury at different points in time. This increased very exponentially in 2007 when Aylesbury took the headlines for having a high level of self-harm among inmates. It was thought that there must be something going on behind the scenes, something that needed to be resolved as quickly as possible. But besides the damning violence, Aylesbury was swimming in a pool of drugs and alcohol. Within those 6 months, there were 59 drug finds and 226 mobile phones were discovered at the facility. Also, the female prison at Aylesbury had its fair share of violence and abuse. In 2009, a prison officer was jailed when he was found guilty of impregnating an inmate. The same officer was found guilty of snuggling mobile phones into the prison. Unlike many other young offenders institutions, the inmates at Aylesbury had little access to education skills or even work. They also had only little access to health care, and the only compensation for well-behaved residents was to run internal prison services like laundry or to help in the kitchen. Nothing cerebral, nothing mentally stimulating. Number 7. Long Creek Youth Development Center. Very recently, the staff members of Long Creek Youth Development Center expressed their concerns about the urgent issues at the youth offenders facility. Long Creek Prison has a lot of violence in the USA, and there are many reasons for this. First, in 2023, the prison housed at least 16 residents every single day. This has led to an increase in violence. In the last 6 months of last year, there were 156 outbursts of violence. To break it down, there were 27 fights, 23 assaults on staff members, 37 assaults on fellow inmates, and 58 uses of force on residents. There have also been 2 to 3 riots at Long Creek Center, and they have caused damage of up to $500,000. One of the reasons why Long Creek is notorious for violence is because of the serious understaffing. For instance, only 44 security positions out of 80 are filled up. The remaining 36 positions are vacant, and this has given the bad eggs among the inmates more freedom to operate. The workers fear for their lives as well, and it's no surprise that there have been a number of resignations from the staff members, including the superintendent, Line Allen, earlier this year. No doubt the lack of adequate staffing, especially in the security department, has led to the repeated violence at Long Creek. It's also largely responsible for the breakout of 9 boys in 2023. They broke out of the main prison and were armed with makeshift weapons, although they did not get to see the outside of the prison wall. It was around 11 p.m. when the police were informed of the escape attempt. According to the report, they had a fire extinguisher, a table clamp, and a guitar. The boys had called the fire department to report a fire incident. This was to serve as a distraction for their escape, which became futile eventually. If anything, this only shows how crafty and stubborn the victims of this notorious child prison are. But which of these 7 child-only prisons did you find most terrifying? Let us know in the comments below.